Welcome to another episode of Rise and Thrive Conversations for Greatness, where we dive deep into stories that inspire us to pursue personal growth, motivation, and success. I'm your host, John Merkus, and today we're joined by an incredible special guest, Mindi Lyons, also known as the Fenyx. Mindy's not just a survivor, she's the epitome of resilience and badassery. I have to say it like that. I don't know. Every time I've read this, I always go, badassery. With a life marked by overcoming personal challenges, she has redefined what it means to be unstoppable. As a mother of three, she's transformed her past struggles into a beacon of hope and empowerment, not only for herself and her children, but for everyone that hears her story. Today, we'll hear the transformative journey and practical strategies that have propelled Mindy from darkness into a life filled with light and success. She embodies what this podcast stands for, rising from adversity and thriving. So get ready to embark on this journey of self-discovery and transformation with the Fenyx, a true revolution in human spirit and a catalyst for extraordinary change. Mindy, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, that was epic. Thank you so much. I loved hearing that, especially the way you said badassery. That was amazing.
Thanks. Well, I hadn't heard that term before we met.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it might be common in the States. It might even be common. I'm just sometimes a dinosaur in this area. We're going to get into all your badassery. Let's have our audience know you a little bit better. So look, I know you've had your fair share of adversity and challenges. And when you're going through some of the things you've gone through, it's hard to think this is going to make me a better person. This is all going to work out when you're in that zone, so to speak. So what are some of the things that you've gone through that were challenging that you've come to see now made you a better person?
That's a fabulous question. To give you a little bit of a quick overview, I'll try and touch on some of sort of the main key points, but I feel like to really give some context as to sort of me and how I've evolved, I would have to go back to the beginning. And I think many of us can relate to what I'm about to say. I grew up in a home that I don't put any shame on my parents. I understand we all kind of do the best that we know how. So I'm not here to say that. However, my story is my story. And there was a lot of negativity that was projected on me. I was told very often that I was stupid. I was good for nothing. I would never amount to anything. And if any man was stupid enough to marry me, that I'd be divorced within 5 years. And there was just a lot of negativity, being called a fat pig, being called ugly. So I grew up in an environment where I had a very negative view of myself, because when you're a child, you don't have the emotional intelligence, you don't have the life experience to understand that people are just projecting sort of their own views or their own anger or how they choose to view life onto you, and you don't learn to separate it. So I kind of took on the things that were told to me as truth. And so I grew up with a very low view of myself. And also in combination with that, I was someone who was a people pleaser. I really wanted to please people. I really wanted to make people happy. And I loved people. I wanted to help. I wanted to serve. I had a kind heart. I'm a very sensitive soul. So I feel things very deeply. I love very deeply. And it just kind of was, in all honesty, the recipe for disaster in terms of the combination of low self-esteem and also being someone who is so deeply feeling and so caring and so empathetic. It's like those are beautiful qualities, but they can also translate into some very interesting dynamics when it comes to relationships. And on that line, I was very eager to leave home. And so at the stroke of turning 18, I left home. I got pregnant shortly after to someone I had met at church. And that alone was a huge no-no. I was raised in a very conservative Christian environment, and there was a lot of shame attached to even that. And so as soon as I turned 19, I had my first daughter. 2 years later, police showed up at our doorstep and arrested my then husband at the time. He was put in prison, and I ended up a single parent for the first time when I was 21 years old, when a lot of people are just graduating from college and partying and just kind of starting their lives. I was now raising a 2-year-old by myself. So I had to move back in with my parents, and, they helped me with my daughter while I went back to work. And then 2.5 years later, I figured I had learned a few things. I had been around the block, and I got remarried to someone who our families knew each other when we were younger. Our sisters were best friends, and he had a son that he brought into the relationship. We ended up having 2 children that we added, so we had 4 total. And that relationship ended up being exponentially worse than the first one. Although it was a slow fade, it never turns out that way from the beginning. You know, a lot of women end up in these situations where they're in a toxic or abusive relationships, and a lot of people look at that and say, you know, I would never end up in something like that, or how do you put up with that? I would never put up with that. But you don't really go into it ever expecting it to turn out the way that it does. And oftentimes it happens so slowly that you don't even recognize what's happening as it's happening, because it's such a slow fade, to the point where you get to a state you can hardly even recognize your life anymore. It's so different than what it used to be. So, about 11 years into that marriage, again, my then husband was arrested, put in prison. So not only once, but twice, I ended up a single parent overnight to people who turned out to be criminals, which, of course, that alone brought on an enormous amount of guilt and shame. And even though I would have never known that the people that I had married would become who they were, there was still a lot of dynamics where I was attached to, you know, I was married to the person. So there's a lot of, you know, my own shame, and how could I have not seen this? How did I end up in this scenario not once but twice? And so all of those things that had been spoken into me as a child, you know, you're a failure, you're good for nothing, you'll never amount to anything, and all of the things, it's like that was true. I felt like that was true about me. And not to mention, like, during the course of that marriage, there were so many things that happened that added on trauma after trauma after trauma, losing a baby late in pregnancy, and just all kinds of financial devastation. I had ballooned up to almost 300 pounds. So it literally hurt to exist. And I just deep down into a very, very dark depression. I definitely contemplated suicide. I had all those thoughts. I was tried on multiple medications and saw 3 therapists and all of the things. So that is a very, very quick overview of some of the major, I guess you would say, life altering things that really brought me to my knees and brought me to that point where I felt, I mean, the epitome of hopelessness, helplessness, you know, like enveloped in darkness that seemed so deep and thick that I would never be able to escape it.
And during those times, did you ever feel like things were going to get better, or this is hard, but it's going to make me a better person? Because, you know, that's really a hard mindset to have, especially when you've, as you said, you've been exposed to people, their judgments on you, and verbal abuse, and then those relationships that aren't working out. How did you get through? Like my mum says, or used to say, rest her soul, sometimes you've just got to live for better days. And
Mm,
sometimes in my darkest moments, I might think that as well. It's like, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm just going to live for a better day. And
mm,
so that can get me through some of those times. But
mhm.
how did you, when you're in, or was there just you? I don't know. How did you get through?
You know, there's different stages. It's like in the darkest point, you know, that's one point. And during that time, all I could think of was my children. And even though I felt like an absolute failure of a mother, there was no way that I could permanently remove myself from the life experience when I had kids. So that wasn't an option for me. And so even though I felt like I was the epitome of a failure at the time, not because I deserved any of this, but just because, you know, you do have the beat yourself down because of like what has your life turned out to be. And you know, my kids are suffering because of not that I made those decisions, but some of my choices obviously impacted, you know, my choice for who I decided to be in a relationship with devastatingly impacted my children. And so there's a lot of that guilt that I held. And so even though I did have a lot of that negative self-talk, I also just have sort of this, I guess, rebellious attitude to an extent where I refused. I was like, I will not let this be the end of my story. I will not be taken down permanently from this. I will not allow this to be my legacy. I'm not going to allow my life to stay this way for the sake of my children, even if I don't feel like I deserve better because I had beat myself down so much, my children deserve better. So if I want to make their life better, and yes, I want my life to be better too, but it was really this resolve to, it was like, it was kind of like, I'm going to prove that I am unstoppable, that I am capable, that I am not the loser, the failure that people thought that I would be, or that I probably should be under the circumstances. It was kind of that take back. And even though I didn't know how that would happen, or even though I didn't feel like I even had the strength to be able to do that, it was more a determined fighter spirit that was sort of like brewing underneath the surface of this hot mess of a person that felt very broken. That I would say was the underlying, I guess, turning mindset that trajectory shifted because of that underlying brewing, fierceness that was inside of me, that this will not be the end of my story.
Yeah, right. So that determination and stubbornness in a way, but that's interesting how that kind of mindset got you through. So you had that strength of that, even despite your circumstances, which is extraordinary. So thanks for explaining how that was part of what part of what got you through. And I've heard you say that vulnerability is a superpower before. And I'm just wondering, because it sounds like, especially talking through those challenges, that you were vulnerable, but that might have been taken advantage of a little bit even. So how does that work as a superpower as well without you leading to be hurt?
Wow, that is such a great question. You have really good questions. Yes, that's the tricky part, right? Because if you are vulnerable either by choice or by circumstance, because sometimes you're circumstantially vulnerable when you didn't necessarily choose to be vulnerable. And in my case, it was both. I chose to be vulnerable with myself, my human spirit, by loving, by giving, by sharing, and that was taken advantage of in the most brutal way possible. In the case of my second marriage, especially, the betrayal was beyond words, indescribable. It was, and it wasn't just that. I was betrayed by my best friends, some family. So it was very, very, the wounding was very deep. So the temptation to shrink back and to, become a hermit, hide in a hole somewhere, and become bitter and cynical and distrusting, because you could look at something like that and say, look where that got me. Obviously, that didn't get me anywhere by trusting. And so I think that it's a really beautiful thing that I've been able to somehow hold a duality of being vulnerable, choosing vulnerability despite what has happened to me in the past, choosing to still hold love and compassion and grace and kindness, choosing not to be cynical, choosing not to be overcome by bitterness. And that's been really tricky because some people could say, well, how this could happen to you again. Why would you choose to be that way? But it's different now. It's different now because I am someone who, with all of the work that I've done, with all of the internal, I've really done that internal work, that self-development work, the shifting of my mindset. I've really delved deep into the healing of my own woundings, my own, things that have happened to me in my life. I've done healing work, which it's never ending. Let's be honest. We're human, stuff surfaces at different times in different ways. But in doing that, I've been able to realize that, establishing those healthy boundaries, really building confidence that's authentic, that I really do understand my value now. I don't have the negative, self-image that I used to have. I love who I've become. And so holding that now, where I have this confidence that I am a person that is worthy. I am someone who has value that's unshakable, that's not dependent on anything on the external, whether it's relationship, bank account balance, career, education. None of that has any impact on my value whatsoever. And so it's kind of like this combination of having that confidence in knowing of your unshakable worthiness and value is able to make me it gives me the ability to show up with vulnerability and rawness and authenticity without having. I'm not saying that I never have fears, talking about these things very openly. Of course, I can subject myself to additional criticism, additional
Mm.
scrutiny. People can twist my words, say all kinds of course, there's fears involved in that. But when I talk about vulnerability being your superpower, it takes an immense amount of courage to be vulnerable. And I think that
Yep.
as humans, we kind of isolate ourselves, whether intentionally or just because of environmental or social conditioning, that the things that we feel shame about need to stay hidden. And I'm trying to be a voice that kind of flips the script. I see things from a very different lens than I think a lot of people do. I see brokenness as not a disadvantage. I see brokenness as power. You can become so much more powerful through brokenness than you can. I don't feel like I'm at a disadvantage because of what I've been through. What I've been through has given me an extreme advantage. And because I've experienced so much darkness, I now, from the law of polarity, have access to the complete opposite spectrum. So the vulnerability aspect, to me, vulnerability is a beautiful thing. It's a superpower. Number one, like I said, because of the courage that it takes to be vulnerable, because there are absolutely things that people could see as negatives that could happen as a result of being vulnerable, right? I mean, that's just a thing. People can be very critical. But when I have chosen to be vulnerable, and when I've also seen other people show up in a state of vulnerability, I am absolutely blown away by how beautiful that is, because it creates connection. And we're in a world where humans are so craving human connection. I feel like stronger than ever before. The world is so fragmented now. So when you can be someone who has the courage to show up in a world that's really striving for perfection, and you can show up in your messiness and say, hey, this is the stuff that's happened in my life, and you're normal, I'm normal, you're messy, I'm messy, but in that messiness we are so beautifully connected. It's like a stained glass window. You bring your brokenness is all shapes, sizes, colors, mine is all shapes, sizes, and colors, and it's like we all weave together in this beautiful stained glass work of art through our brokenness. And it's like the light of us sharing our stories shining through our brokenness is what makes us such a beautiful work of art in the collective of us, all of this doing this together.
So what a great way to put it. I love how you put that. It's so beautiful. So that having that vulnerability is a superpower. What I'm hearing is some people may shut down or try and protect themselves, but if you are aware of some boundaries that you might need to set and still be vulnerable, what it allows is that human connection and that love and that light to shine through in your life instead of closing that down and not allowing that to come into your life.
Yes, and I'm definitely not wanting to shame anybody who is choosing not to be forthcoming about certain things, because we're all on our own journey.
Sure.
And I just find for myself, here's what I like to do. I like to share what I have found works for me. And then I invite other
Yep.
people to try it on for themselves and see how it feels. But I will say that vulnerability almost never feels comfortable. It's like you have to embrace the discomfort. But when I've embraced the discomfort, and I have seen the impact, and I've experienced both sides of the impact of being vulnerable, of being the person who has lost friends, who has been criticized, and all of that. So I have experienced what could be perceived as the negative, right, side of vulnerability.
Mm.
But I've also experienced the side where people would come to me saying, oh my gosh, I was going through something similar. Nobody knows about it. I felt so much shame. I felt totally alone. And when you shared your story, I knew that like someone out there understood. And I remember myself, being the person that showed up to church and being involved in the community and having the smiling face and yet feeling so alone and isolated, and like not a single soul on this planet could possibly understand the dynamics of what I was going through in my personal life. And so I imagine that version of me out there that is craving that breath of oxygen, who doesn't feel the courage to be able to talk about what they're going through. And if someone else can be a voice for the people who haven't yet found theirs, to me that is so
Mm,
much more worth taking whatever risk comes along with being vulnerable. If it means losing friends, that's okay. I've been able to find peace with whoever walks out of my life. I don't have any bitterness or cynicism for friends who have left me or walked out on my life. I've come to this place of radical trust where I just have this deep knowing and this deep trust that whatever is happening is somehow, even if it doesn't feel good, even if I can't imagine how it could be good, because of my life experiences that I've navigated and how I have seen really beautiful things come from immensely painful situations. I just know that I know that I know that I know that somehow it's going to be okay. And I choose to be vulnerable because of the people out there that need that breath of oxygen.
Mindy, that is amazing. I can hear so many good things in there for our listeners, but also too, I need to big up you, as they say, because one of the things that I can really hear is you took and are taking personal responsibility for your circumstances and doing something about that, and that takes a shitload of courage, and that is not always easy to do, despite your circumstances. We've said before on the podcast, we've talked about there's two aspects to being human: your circumstances and the conversation you are about your circumstances. And often the
Mhm.
conversation you are about your circumstances has a bigger impact on you than your actual circumstances. But I can hear that personal responsibility, that tenaciousness, that I'm going to choose, you even said it, I choose to think this way. So understanding that you have the power to choose the way that you think, these are incredible qualities in people that are inspiring. And
Mm,
so I know that well, I was going to say love sharing your story. I'm not sure if I should use those words, but I know you are passionate about sharing your story because you want to help people that might not be in that space to be able to take on that mindset of somehow I'm responsible, or I'm going to take responsibility to build something better, to create more love and light in my life, to choose the way that I think, because that's also a
mm,
journey to get to that point. I don't think as human beings we wake up in that one day and go, you know what, I'm responsible for everything in my life, and so I'll choose this
mm,
particular mindset and I'll make this happen. You know,
mhm,
I guess you've got to have lived life to be able to take that on and understand that. So I just wanted to say that to you because it's absolutely extraordinary and really beautiful.
mm. Thank you. Well, that really means a lot, and I'm glad that you pointed that out.
I can also hear that you are a lot for other people, which is amazing, and I hope that sometimes you sit back and reflect and say, you know what, I'm amazing. You know,
Mm,
I'm amazing. And maybe you don't, but I challenge you to next time you look into the mirror to look at yourself and say, I'm amazing. Because to people that hear your story, people like me, to others all around the world, you are, and that's to be celebrated. So
mm.
let's celebrate that.
Well, you have no idea how timely that is, because just to share a little personal share, if I may, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just yesterday, I did another interview, and it was an interesting thing because during the podcast, I was interrupted and told that my story was too overwhelming, that it was too intense, and it really brought up a lot of those things of I'm too much, I'm too overwhelming, I'm too deep, this is too dark, this is too, a
Mm,
lot of that. And I'm not faulting anybody anybody for that because I understand the benefit of triggers where it can help reveal parts of yourselves that are wanting to be healed. And it definitely triggered some I'm too much. So the fact that you said that in this particular interview, that you're saying, I can tell that you're someone who is probably too much for some people, but you need to celebrate that you're amazing. Like that alone is such a beautiful thing for you to have said to me, especially today. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. You're giving me goosebumps. Well, the thing is, Mindy, you do you. That's all
Yeah.
you can do. You
Yeah.
do you. You're amazing. Other people's judgments, okay, people are going to have them. We can't stop those. Sometimes they can cut as well. You know, this old saying of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's just not true.
Yeah.
It just depends on where you are. You know, one day you might be feeling great, and those kind of things that anyone can say anything to you and it won't matter to you. And then there might be other days where you might have not had a good enough sleep, or some other things are happening or whatever, and someone can say something to you and it does hurt a bit, and then you've got to process that. And there's that the difference between logically thinking about something and then also the emotional impact, and trying to think about things in both those ways. So logically, I know that what that person said to me is their opinion and it's not true, and I know that I'm making a difference. But then emotionally, it's like, oh, I put myself out there, and that's the feedback I got, and that doesn't really feel that great right now.
Exactly. You nailed it.
So I totally get it, but yeah, you keep going, girlfriend. Now this I know you've done a lot of personal development. I can hear it in what you're talking about, and that's probably allowed you to take responsibility and have the mindset that you do to move forward and bring that more love and light into your life. What are
Mm.
some of the either personal development books or people and principles you've been exposed to that have really made a difference in your life? Because I like to share that on the show, because you
Mhm.
could mention a book or something and someone will go, oh, I'll check that out. And that could make a difference to them too. So I'd love to know some of the things that you've read or books or whatever that's inspired you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that definitely has been a huge part of my focus. When I saw the breadth and depth of the problem, I realized the solution has to be just as big. So I put a lot of intentional work on my mindset and my personal development because I understood that that really does impact how my life is going to turn out. And just like you said, it's a journey. It was a journey, but it is a journey. I didn't become who I am and I didn't completely transform my life because it just happened. It's my life could have been very, very different, but because I did make the conscious choice that my life was going to be different, my story was going to be different, and I took that radical responsibility, which is hard to take. It's very hard to be that responsible and to stop placing blame anywhere else and to stop giving your power away to anyone or anything. You completely take it up, all of it. And you say, if my life is going to be different, I'm going to make it different. Nobody's coming to save me. You truly become you choose to become your own superhero, and you can, even if you don't feel like you have the power, you don't have the strength, you don't have the confidence. I promise you, you are so much more powerful than you realize. You're more beautiful than you think. You're more knowledgeable, all of that. And whatever you're lacking, you can absolutely get every bit of it. I have added so much to myself, to my skill set, to my personality, to my mental fortitude. All of that has come as a result of my intentional focus on my personal development journey. So I cannot amplify that message enough to make this a strong focus. For me, focused on podcasts. I would put podcasts on for hours and hours a day, whether I was cooking, cleaning, driving, taking a shower, literally anything where I wasn't working. I knew that to change my mind, I had to put something in my mind to replace my negative thoughts. Otherwise, my negative thoughts would just be running in the background all the time. And so I needed to
Mm.
distract myself from my own thoughts. And the only way to do that was to keep a different chatter going on in my mind than what my mind was already producing. So some of the podcasts that I felt found exceptionally helpful were the School of Greatness, which I'm sure people are very familiar with. Lewis Howes is in charge of the School of Greatness. So awesome. Another one is called Maxed Out by Ed Milet. That's another very, very good one for mindset, inspiration, encouragement, strategies, all sorts of good stuff there. I'm a big fan of Mel Robbins and her podcast and just who she is as a person. She's all about authenticity. I read a lot of
Yep.
different books on mindset, transforming your mindset, on failing, how failing is actually a very necessary part of success. So failing forward, I read that, eat that frog, go for no.
So failing failing forward, I haven't heard of before, but I like the title.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. I think that one might be Brian Tracy, I'm not sure, don't quote me on that. There's another one that's called I might not remember the name of it. You know what I'm gonna be doing? I'm gonna be putting on my website, I get asked this question all the time. So on my website, I'm going to put a section for free resources, and one of those is going to be where I put a list of all of the books, all of the podcasts, all of the things that have helped me in different aspects of my life. But yeah, Jamie Kern Lima, her Believe It book was very impactful to me.
What was the frog one?
Oh, eat that frog. Yeah. That the premise of that is a very simple concept, but the premise of that one is that a lot of times we procrastinate and we do a lot of busy work thinking that, we're actually making a difference, but it's taking the thing that is the most awful thing that you're dreading the most and doing that first. So eating the frog, it's like the frog is the most awful part. Eat the frog first, and then everything else becomes easy. So that can be applied in your personal life as well. It's not just necessarily time management or something like that. It's like if you can do the scary thing, the thing that you're fearing, you do that and you just get it out of the way. For me, doing these podcasts was a part of sort of that because it can be scary, but it's like if you just rip the band-aid off and you just do the thing, there's no way to build self-trust and to build confidence without actually doing the thing that you fear and then getting on the other side of it. And that builds
Mm.
self-trust and confidence more and more and more. That's one of the reasons why I am as confident as I am now, is because I have continuously put myself in situations that are scary, quite honestly, to me, or at
Mm.
least very uncomfortable. And then, yeah, I'm gonna, I don't have high expectations. I know I'm not going to be perfect. I know I'm going to mess up, but I keep reminding myself that imperfection, creates connection. And so even my imperfection is actually a beautiful thing. And so knowing that helps me to step into some of my fears in a more powerful way.
Imperfection creates connection. I love quotes, and I haven't heard that one before.
I don't know where it came from. I just say it all the time.
That's awesome. Why not? Why not? I have also sometimes on the show we've talked about this imposter syndrome stuff, and people will never do anything if you think that you can't, or if you think, "Who am I to do that?" or "That's another level that I'm not at now." That kind of thinking and mindset keeps you stuck and won't let you stretch and go for the next thing. I did hear you talk about imposter syndrome and faith, and I really liked that, your take on that. So I wanted to ask you that today because I really think our Rise and Thrive listeners will benefit of your take on that. So if anyone is listening out there that thinks, I can't do it, why me? Or I don't feel like that's me. I've kind of got this dream that I keep in a box, but I don't dare open it because, who am I to do that? I'd really like it if you could give our listeners the benefit of your take on all of that.
Oh, that's one of my favorite things. I love this topic. I feel like I have a different perspective on this, and hopefully some will really resonate with what I'm saying. First of all, anything that you're telling yourself as to, why me? I'm not good enough. Who am I to think that? All of that, most of that is just thoughts that have been projected onto you from someone else. And even if it's something you tell yourself, most likely it's been projected onto you from someone else. And I'm just going to say, who is anyone to tell you what your capabilities are or aren't? Nobody has the right to do that.
How amazing is Mindi Lyons? That was a great first part of our conversation for greatness, where we talked about her incredible resilience and the guiding light of inspiration that she is, how she's turned her trials into triumphs. Next week, part 2 of our conversation, where we continue and we delve deeper into the transformative power of vulnerability, and she shares her personal development tools that reshaped her life. She's also going to reveal the key strategies that anyone can use to turn their deepest struggles into their greatest strengths. We also continue our amazing conversation about imposter syndrome, and her tips on that are mind-blowing, life-changing. I'm using them. I hope you do too. Thank you, Mindy. You're amazing. I hope you can't wait for part 2. I've already heard it because I've edited it and it is excellent. So catch that straight away and stay awesome. Love you long time.